Welcome to the Catholic Apostolate Center's blogcast series. Today's episode is titled The Guarantee of Suffering, written and read by Brian Rhude. There are a few guarantees in this life. Some say it is death and taxes. Purdue basketball fans, such as myself, will add Matt Painter. But there's another guarantee in life, and it's one that is as uncomfortable and taboo as death. Suffering. Death, taxes, Matt Painter, and suffering. The suffering we think of most often is typically connected to death. The suffering of a cancer patient, or of someone who has been in a tragic accident. This suffering is very real, but also extraordinary. I don't mean that this suffering is somehow alien to the human experience. It is deeply real and personal to those who experience it and their loved ones, but that it is truly extra or outside of the ordinary. Ordinary suffering comes in many forms. The lack of sleep felt by new parents, the inability to pay one's bills after being laid off, the end of a relationship that seemed to be perfect, the inexplicable change in direction from the Lord after following a path that seemed ordained by that same God. These, and countless other examples, are the suffering of the day-to-day life of the human person. There is a human tendency to compare suffering. Well, their suffering seems so much worse than mine, so mine must be insignificant, and my response to my suffering is somehow overblown or distorted. But this reaction is what is distorted. Suffering is, as I said at the beginning of this blog, guaranteed in life. That is a pretty undesirable guarantee. All we have to do is look out into the world or just rewatch the movie of our own lives to find some sort of suffering, whether great or quote-unquote small. The question is not if we will suffer, but how we handle suffering and what it does in our lives. I am personally unable to understand how one can endure suffering without some sort of conception of God, and more specifically, a personal relationship with the God who became man and who suffered and died for us. It is just that relationship that has gotten me through the traumatic death of my father just over 5 years ago, and the daily suffering that is thrown my way. Suffering can easily make a strong person crumble. So the first thing we should do is realize that we are not strong, but weak. We are the sick that Jesus professes need a physician in the Gospel of Matthew. The physician is the only one who can prescribe the medication of grace needed to help us through our suffering. The grace is dispensed to us not through pills or syringes, but through prayer. It is only through constant prayer, which is the reception of the transformative love of God, that suffering has meaning and can be endured. Sister Ruth Burrows says in her book, Essence of Prayer, that God's touch in our lives, quote, however lightly, means I suffer, end quote. Prayer opens us up to the fact that we are nothing. We are weak. We are in great need. And, to quote Sister Burrows again, it is then that I really experience that I need Jesus, and everything depends on my living this out, letting go of the controls, handing them over to Him, and accepting to have no holiness, no achievement of my own, to be before God as nothing. This is the bottom line of suffering. It is not gratuitous, meaningless, or completely nonsensical. It is the process of being stripped of all of our egotistical and self-seeking tendencies that leave us closed off to God's healing touch. Patient endurance of the suffering we experience is the way that we are prepared for life with God. How do we know this? Because Jesus Christ took on human form and lived in perfect obedience as the apostle to the eternal Father. Jesus' life found its highest fulfillment in obedient suffering and sacrifice in the Garden of Gethsemane, at the pillar, on the road to Calvary, and on the cross. In his suffering, Christ took on all of ours, from the suffering of a broken heart to the suffering of death, and brought them to meaning. In fact, it was the signs of his suffering that he kept after his resurrection as trophies of his victory over death. It was these same signs of suffering, Jesus' wounds, that proved the resurrection to Thomas. Our wounds, our suffering, participate in the suffering and wounds of Christ. Thomas experienced the risen Christ in his wounds, and we too experience him in our wounds. Suffering is a guarantee, but it does not end as pain. It leads us to victory, to intimacy with God, and brings us to God as empty vessels for him to fill with his glory.